One of the most glaring ethical issues in regards to the drones case is the issue of human rights. After World War II, the United Nations created and adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they've been used ever since by all members of the United Nations. So according to this declaration, all people are entitled to certain rights just for being human. These are things that can never be taken away, and all people are born with just for being human beings. A few that I wanted to highlight for this case in particular were the freedom from cruel and inhumane punishment, freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention, which we'll also call punishment, and then finally the right to adequate standard of living for well-being, both for the individual and for their family. Based on those rights, we can ask ourselves if the drone program in fact does violate the Human Declaration of Rights. So we look at the use of Hellfire missiles to destroy buildings and cars and kill everyone inside. Does that violate people's freedom from cruel and inhumane punishment? Or what about the targeting of individuals based on mere suspicions of terrorism? Again, you can make an argument either way that that violates or doesn't violate people's freedom from arbitrary arrest or punishment. And then finally, what about preventing civilians from engaging in everyday activities? As we see in the case, the act of having drones patrol certain areas prevents people from living their lives. It prevents farmers from going outside. It prevents parents from sending their children to school. So does this violate their right to have a standard of living that's adequate for well-being? Ben Emerson is the United Nations Special Reporter on Counterterrorism and Human Rights. I found an interesting article based on his perspective on the United States drone program. And the article is from 2012, and at the time he was planning to investigate the drone program because he believed that the civilian casualties totaled over 50 at the time, so clearly that number has gone up since then. He submits that governments have a responsibility to protect civilians and individuals who are suspected of terrorism. Being suspected of terrorism isn't enough for their rights to be vacated. A little bit more about Mr. Emerson. He takes issue with the current structure of the war on terrorism. He believes that it's being used as a cover-up and an excuse that's being used to justify violations of international law. And he also claims that acts of counterterrorism that don't comply with human rights regulations can and should be considered war crimes, and that members of government should be prosecuted. So the next concept that struck me as an important guideline for analyzing the ethical issues in this case was the idea of a global ethic, and this was covered in chapter 10 of the text. So the global ethic was put into place to prevent religious and social disputes which account for a large portion of the world's conflicts. This was agreed upon by over 6,500 representatives from nearly all religions and ethnic backgrounds. Then it was ratified by a council of former heads of state and prime ministers. And this entails two main universal principles. The first principle is that all people must be treated humanely, regardless of their language, skin color, mental ability, political beliefs, or national or social origin, and also that all individuals and groups, regardless of power, must respect the dignity of others. Here I've starred political beliefs because I believe it's the most applicable to this case. So this principle of global ethics leads me to an important question. Is using drones to target specific individuals based on suspicion of political affiliation with a terrorist group ethical? Again, that's something that we can just think about as we look through this case. One of the global ethic is the golden rule. And the golden rule states that what you wish done to yourself, do to others. So considering the golden rule, what does the drone program say about the United States? Given the drone program's harmful effects on the lives of innocent civilians, is that something the U.S. government would want its citizens to be subject to? Also, would we as a country be willing to allow other nations to fly drones on our land in an attempt to fight terrorism if it meant stripping innocent Americans of their peace of mind, their ability to feel comfortable sending their children to school, and maybe even costing them their lives? I don't know. And finally, as far as adhering to global ethics, this requires a commitment to a specific culture, a culture of nonviolence, a culture that respects all life, a culture that values tolerance and truthfulness. Clearly, based on this culture, terrorists do not abide. But what about the United States government? According to Ben Emerson, it's possible that our government may be further violating human rights in an attempt to fight these terrorists. And as we all know, two wrongs don't make a right. It's up to government officials to use their moral imaginations to take in all the other perspectives and devise a creative solution that's in the best interest of everyone going forward.